This podcast serves Middle Tennessee every weekday morning, and it's made possible by member support. Learn how you can make a difference at WPLN.org/support.
This is the Nashvillager podcast. It's November 17th, 2025. On this day in 1973, Richard Nixon delivered one of the more famous, or perhaps I should say infamous, lines ever delivered by a sitting president. Truly, if you type Nixon and the letter I into Google, it will immediately autofill correctly. I am not a crook. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Even a decade or so later, I remember as a kid that I am not a crook was the defining phrase people would use to evoke Nixon. And I always understood that it was part of his reaction to the Watergate scandal, but I don't think I ever heard anything about where or when he said it. And it turns out that those particulars are a little weirder than I would have imagined. So the setting was a conference of newspaper editors from around the U.S. who gathered at Walt Disney World, of all places, for a meeting organized by the Associated Press. And the president agreed to come to that meeting and answer questions from those editors. This was all happening about a year and a half after operatives for his campaign were arrested for breaking into the Democratic campaign offices, 6 months after White House counsel John Dean began cooperating with investigators. The televised congressional hearings into the cover-up had captivated the nation's attention that summer. And then, through October, it had been development after development. The vice president resigned. Nixon tried not to hand over the secret Oval Office recordings and then fired top members of the White House legal team. Things were a real mess. And Nixon was a mess himself. People have since described him as sort of collapsing in on himself during that time. He wasn't sleeping. He didn't trust anyone. He was picking fights left and right. And all of that was the context for his trip to face off against hundreds of journalists in the happiest place on earth. Oh, and this was televised too. It started off in the deep end with a question about whether Watergate had the potential to end the American Republic, then quickly got into the weeds. Nixon was sharing all kinds of details about his finances and how the recording system worked. When he was asked a non-Watergate question, he made a morbid joke about how his fuel-saving decision to scale back certain details of his flight down to Florida may have created safety risks. But hey, at least if Air Force One went down, that would save the nation from an impeachment. Yes, that actually is the joke he made. But it was at the end of a very long-winded answer to a question from a Tennessee editor, Richard Smizer from the Oak Ridger in East Tennessee, that Nixon uttered the famous line. Smizer basically asked if Watergate could be explained by the idea that we ask a president to hold more responsibility than one person can actually handle. That gave Nixon the opening to remind people about the many other things that were on his plate at the time of the break-in, especially some high-profile international incidents. He suggested that he delegated too much control of his campaign to other people so he could focus on his work as president. He went on to talk about money, and from there he said he'd never profited from an elected office, never obstructed justice. And then, seemingly talking more about the financial side of things than the Watergate particulars, he said, quote, "I welcome this kind of examination because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I am not a crook. I have earned everything I've got." Over the following months, even more information came out. It became clear he'd had direct and hands-on involvement with the Watergate break-in and cover-up. Congress started moving towards impeachment. Nixon resigned from office. And about a month after that, President Gerald Ford issued a pardon for Nixon, which Nixon formally accepted. Now, evidently, that acceptance was meant to indicate that the former president did admit guilt. The whole idea of the pardon in that case was to protect the dignity of the office and let the nation start moving on from Watergate. But that's not how people took it. The overwhelming public opinion was that the pardon was one last act of covering things up. Now, here in Tennessee, in 2025, we recently got word of White House pardons for some members of our state's political community. It's hard to know just what purpose one of them served, and the others have drawn criticism from members of the president's own party. The confusing one went to the husband of East Tennessee congressional representative Diana Harshbarger. As a pharmacist, he was convicted of substituting cheap medication from China that wasn't approved for use in this country when preparing prescriptions for dialysis patients. He's already served his sentence, and the pardon doesn't clear his record or restore his revoked license. But it's a chance for President Trump to show a little extra support for a member of Congress who's been strongly MAGA since her election in 2020. The other pardons are for Glenn Cassida and Cade Cothran. Now, I've talked about them on this podcast several times before. That's the former state House Speaker and his former top aide who were convicted earlier this year for running a kickback scheme that let them pocket taxpayer dollars. Their pardons came through before either had reported to prison to start their sentences or even truly get their appeals up and running in a serious way. So it truly does make everything go away for them. The two men at the top of Tennessee's legislature now have spoken out publicly about their frustration with the pardon. House Speaker Cameron Sexton, who at one time was expected to be the star witness at the trial, testifying against Cassida and Cothran, made it very clear to WBIR that he thinks the president made the wrong move. And he pointed out that all of the major actions by federal prosecutors, the initial indictment, the trial itself, the sentencing hearing, all happened while Trump was president. So the statement that accompanied the pardon about it being an overreach of the Biden administration doesn't make sense. Senate Speaker Randy McNally wasn't as talkative on the subject, but he did tell reporters last week that he thought the pardons were a bad call. And keep in mind, those guys worked in the legislature with Cassida. They worked with him in the GOP caucus. They saw him in action day in, day out for years. If anyone knows how he operates, it's those guys. Meanwhile, the other player in the kickback scheme, former Representative Robin Smith, is considered unlikely to get a pardon of her own. She got a lesser sentence of just 8 months in return for testifying against Cassida and Cothran at trial. In just a few minutes, how a blind spot in the justice system contributes to domestic violence. That's coming up after the newscast.
At WPLN, we tell stories about honoring our families.
If he become a monk, that means that mom and dad will go to heaven when they pass away.
And preserving memories.
I never heard of a Rosenwald school. Nobody never told me that's where I went.
I'm Char Daston, and my reporting connects you with your neighbors and the important moments in their lives.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. The recent government shutdown was the longest in U.S. history. Many federal programs that help Americans in need were impacted or cut off entirely, as things like food aid benefits and Head Start programs, and, as WPLN Cynthia Abrams reports, a lesser-known benefit, utility assistance.
On a recent afternoon, Denise Simpson, a mother of two and Belmont nursing student, is at the Metro Action Commission in South Nashville. She's a SNAP recipient, and without federal food aid, costs are mounting.
It's been tough, especially being a mother of two boys, and one of them being special needs, and he requires so much. It's hard to be able to take care of your family that's needed.
Simpson is at Metro Action to apply for the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, otherwise known as LIHEAP. It's a federal program that provides one-time payments to people who need help with their gas or electric bills, and becomes especially important as temperatures drop during the winter.
I don't care what nobody says, you have to be super mom with assistance. It takes a village.
But a week after applying, Simpson hasn't heard back. That's because during the shutdown, none of the funds from LIHEAP were dispersed. In Tennessee, that's roughly $72 million missing.
As the program was delayed, the more families found themselves in crisis.
That's Lisa McCready Beverly, who works for Metro Action, one of the local agencies that disperses the funds.
And then during all of this, we had the disruption as it relates to SNAP. And so when you have all of those different scenarios with families or individuals whose incomes are already very, very limited, it exacerbates the situations that they're already having to deal with.
Even though the shutdown has now ended, it's taking time to get things back up and running. And the need is there. Since November 1st, more than 10,000 households across the state have applied for LIHEAP assistance. Cynthia Abrams, WPLN News.
A national religious freedom organization is accusing a Tennessee school district of discrimination. The case centers around a student's request to start a faith-based sports club. School board members in Smith County said no. 5 years ago, that district was sued over religious activities that were allowed on campus. That case ended in a consent decree that explicitly barred prayer at school events by academic officials, the distribution of religious materials, or allowing third parties to pray, preach, or share literature about faith. Now the First Liberty Institute says it's speaking up for a family who wants their children surrounded by a Christian community while at school. The group cites U.S. Supreme Court and Tennessee state laws protecting the rights of students to express their faith through religious student clubs. 3 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a former high school coach who was fired after he led a prayer with his players after a game. The court found that the school violated the First Amendment when it excluded a Christian club from public school while allowing other non-curricular clubs. The Tennessee Transportation Department has given its approval to adjust the cost to use choice lanes. Adjustable pricing is like rideshare services. It gets more expensive to use the lanes when the demand increases. This affects drivers along a portion of the I-24 South corridor that runs between Nashville and Murfreesboro, and the project is still in the review process. The Transportation Modernization Board did make a stipulation. The prices could only surge when congestion gets so bad and traffic flow gets ratcheted down so far that cars are going below 45 miles per hour. Nashville singer-songwriter Todd Snyder, known for his unique blend of humor and story, has died. He was 59 years old.
Racing that moon, climbing the walls of this hurricane, still overall, I can't complain.
Snyder's 2004 album East Nashville Skyline is essential to roots music. He carved a space out for himself as a mischievous folk wit, an influential figure in the Americana scene, and an emblem of the bohemian early 2000s East Nashville artist community. Snyder spoke with WPLN's Julie Height in 2012.
You know, they say don't talk religion or politics in a bar. And I feel like I try to approach it with the same way I approach being in a bar when things come on the news or when the topics start getting heavy. The last thing that you want to do, or that you want someone to do to you, in my opinion, is be preached at or lobbied or educated or any of that. I tend to just not take it that seriously.
You can read more about Snyder now on our website. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Probation officers with the Tennessee Department of Correction are tasked with monitoring offenders in the community, to check in with them in person, search their homes for prohibited drugs or guns. In her latest investigation with ProPublica, WPLN's criminal justice reporter Paige Flaker uncovered a dangerous gap in that probation supervision that has deadly consequences for domestic violence victims. And a warning for our listeners, this story, which is more than 10 minutes long, describes allegations of repeated domestic violence and murder.
14-year-old Chloe Peebles sits in the living room of her grandma's house, holding a photo album on her lap. It's bright pink and glitzy, covered in sparkles.
What does the front say?
She got this made for me.
Chloe's Journey.
Mm-hmm.
Your mom made that?
Mm-hmm. Before she passed away.
The photos show little Chloe at the water park, at her 6th birthday, and in nearly every photo next to her, smiling this huge smile, is her mom, Temptress Peebles.
Yeah. So you guys were really close.
Real close. That was my first best friend, my only best friend.
Chloe holds tight to these memories. Her mom died when she was just 8 years old. She was there the day her mom was shot and killed, October 17th, 2019. They were outside their apartment in North Nashville. She remembers seeing her mom's ex-boyfriend, Brandon Horton, with a gun.
I tried to hug him. I was like, no, don't do that. So I tried to hug him and he pushed me away.
And then gunshots.
It was just like you could see it in slow motion. The gunshots, like 2 days after she died, I was still having nightmares. Gunshots, I wake up from hearing gunshots in my head. Like I couldn't sleep for days. It is like all I could do is thinking about what I'm gonna do now, or what am I gonna do without her.
Peebles bled to death in the street, while Chloe tried to dial 911. Horton is awaiting trial on charges of killing Peebles. He and his lawyer declined to comment for this story. Over nearly 3 years, WPLN and ProPublica have examined hundreds of domestic violence gun homicides like Peebles across the state. We wanted to understand how often those crimes were committed by someone who never should have had access to a gun. What we found is that in Tennessee's 5 biggest cities, roughly 1 in every 4 domestic violence gun homicide victims was allegedly killed by someone who was legally barred from having a firearm because of their criminal history. And we identified 16 cases where the offender had an additional layer of oversight. The alleged shooters were under supervision by state probation officers with Tennessee's Department of Correction at the time of the crime. Tennessee's probation officers are in close contact with high-risk offenders and can search homes for prohibited weapons without a warrant if they have reasonable suspicion. And probation officers have to request a warrant for the offender's arrest if they commit a new crime. But until that warrant is served by police, all in-person supervision stops. That pause can be for a few days, or in other cases, it can stretch for months or even over a year. Between 2019 and 2022, WPLN and ProPublica found at least 6 people, including Temptress Peebles, were shot to death during that gap in oversight. Her mom, Karen, says it might have cost her daughter her life.
The system did her wrong. If the police department had did their job and that probation office they did theirs, I think it could have been prevented.
It could have been prevented, she says. People's friends and family called her Chippy because she had a high, sing-songy voice like a chipmunk. Almost every night, Peoples talked to her mom on the phone, and she never missed a Sunday dinner. She started dating Horton around 2018. She was hesitant, her cousin, Princess Pinkston, said, in part because of his criminal history. Horton had just started 10 years of supervised probation after he pleaded guilty to facilitation of second-degree murder in a robbery where a man was shot and killed.
Even when she saw the red flags, she would just try anything in her power to try to make him better. She felt like she could save everybody. She can help everyone.
The probation department classified Horton as a high-risk, violent probationer, which meant that every month, his probation officer was required to see him face-to-face 3 times, conduct a home visit, and check to make sure he hadn't been arrested. Horton was assigned to the busy Nashville probation office, coming under the supervision of probation officer Derek Finch.
They want you to have all this rapport, come on in, Bill, sit down. How's it go with the wife and kids? They want all that, but who's got time for that?
Finch had been on the job for a little more than a year at the time and says at one point he was juggling more than 100 offenders in his caseload. Records show the department fired him in 2024 for reporting that he conducted a home visit with an offender who was in custody at that time. Finch said he just misremembered.
I got let go because I couldn't keep up with the caseload anymore.
During the time he monitored Horton, Finch requested multiple probation violation warrants for his arrest. The first time was after an incident on January 12th, 2019. In a court document, Peebles alleged that Horton had gone on Facebook Live and said he would kill her before he saw her with another man. He called her, showed up at her house, blocked her car in with his. They argued. He punched her twice in the head. She ran to her car to escape him, she wrote in a court document, and he tore the wipers off of her car and used them to strike the glass as she cowered inside. Metro Nashville Police Department filed a domestic assault charge against Horton for the incident. MNPD arrested him, searched his home for weapons, according to probation records. He paid a bond to get out of jail while awaiting his court date. Finch requested that probation violation warrant, a judge signed it, and then police arrested Horton again, days later. But at a court hearing, Peebles failed to appear, and the case was dismissed. Her mom said she didn't show up because she was afraid, and that Horton had threatened her if she pursued charges.
The victim, more frequently than not, is the evidence.
Christina Johnson is a domestic violence prosecutor with the Nashville District Attorney's Office. She says what happened in this case is common.
If the evidence isn't there, we have no choice. We can't go forward.
Once that assault charge against Horton was dropped, the probation violation that was based on those charges was also dismissed. Horton remained in the community under Finch's supervision. And it didn't take long before the process started all over again, after Horton was arrested with a stolen gun in late January. Despite Horton's status as a high-risk offender, multiple arrests in a month, and his possession of a prohibited firearm, Judge Jennifer Smith returned Horton to supervision instead of incarcerating him. In a statement to WPLN, Smith said she cannot comment on previous decisions. But Finch said he saw multiple offenders violate probation with few consequences.
A lot of these guys, they just keep going in and out. The court wants to give this guy every opportunity to do the right thing. But at some point, you have to draw the line.
That revolving door allowed Horton to return to the street again. The next incident would place him in TDOC's supervision gap. It was a stormy night in July 2019 when Peebles was in her bedroom of her apartment. She heard a loud boom at the back door. She got up, she wrote in a court document, and saw Brandon Horton with a gun. She ran out of the apartment and hid by climbing up a tree. When police arrived, they couldn't find Horton. Police charged him with felon in possession of a weapon and aggravated assault. And for the third time in less than a year, Finch requested and was granted a probation violation warrant for Horton's arrest. Then, as is spelled out in TDOC's standards of supervision, Finch stopped supervising Horton in person until police could arrest him. In the past, that warrant was served in a matter of days. This time, it would take 3 months. And during that time, all that was required of Finch was a once-a-month check for arrests in a computer system. TDOC declined to make any probation officials available for this story. In a statement, the department said that supervision remains active for offenders who have warrants, but the objective changes. Instead of ensuring that they're following the rules, probation officers share information with law enforcement to help them with the arrest. The spokesperson confirmed that there is no in-person supervision during that time. Julia Weber, an expert on probation and domestic violence, says it's vital that law enforcement serves warrants in these cases quickly.
And it's not unusual because of resources, training, and protocol that law enforcement decides we'll just serve this when we pull someone over. When I hear that, I think what I tell communities is we have to recognize how dangerous a decision that is.
In the 6 cases of domestic violence homicide that occurred during this supervision gap, WPLN and ProPublica found the time between when a warrant was issued and when police made an arrest stretched from as few as 9 days to as many as 425 days. The victims were all young Black moms. One was a cheerleading coach and a mom of 2. Another was shot while her 2-year-old daughter lay on the bed nearby. In a third case, a mother of 3 was found in a creek days before Christmas with a purple domestic violence bracelet around her wrist. Their deaths left 12 children without their mothers. In her final days, records show that Peebles was increasingly aware of how much danger she was in. On October 7th, she called the probation department and asked if Horton could be served his warrant at an upcoming court date. The manager said she would try and help. October 8th, Horton failed to show up at court. October 9th, MMPD tried to serve Horton's July violation warrant, their only documented attempt, but no one answered the door. When asked why it took so long, MMPD said that wanted people like Horton can be evasive and hard to find. October 11th, Peebles called probation again to say that Horton had failed to appear in court because he, quote, spoke to Officer Finch and was told he would be taken into custody at that time on his warrant. The probation file reads. The manager noted that Peebles was upset and that Horton was threatening to hurt her. Finch denies warning Horton that he would be arrested.
Everything that could have been done was done from our end. Once that warrant is filed, there is nothing else that we can do.
And just 6 days after Peebles' final call to the probation department on October 17th, police say Horton waited for her outside of her apartment. Chloe had forgotten her phone in the kitchen, so they went back to get it. Moments later, Horton allegedly shot and killed Peebles in front of her daughter. Chloe lives with her grandma now, sleeping in her mom's childhood bedroom to feel closer to her. She's starting to fully understand the ways that the system did not protect her mom from Horton. But the 14-year-old does not place the blame at the feet of probation or police or even judges. Instead,
I always felt like her death was on me. If we would never went back to that house to get my phone, or I would never left my phone, maybe she would have still been here.
Paige Pfleger, WPLN News.
Horton's trial begins today. To read Paige's full investigation, visit our website, WPLN.org. Thanks for listening to the Nash Villager podcast. We take this look at Nashville news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and tell a friend or give us a mention on your socials. It really helps get the word out. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can become a member at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.